Good evening, I'm Chris Matthews. Leading off, it never stops. Last night on Hardball, I had a pretty good tiff with former Bush spokesman Ari Fleischer. We both gave it a good effort, and I hope he comes back. That said, I didn't catch something he said right at the end of his appearance, just as I was thanking him for coming on. I didn't hear it until I watched the 7 o'clock edition aired and didn't like it. Ari,
Chris,
agree
the
to
issue
disagree.
was, and I believe this still today, and of course you and I disagree with that, but after September 11th, having been hit once, how could we take a chance that Saddam might not strike again? And that's the threat that has been removed, and I think we're all safer with that threat being removed.
And I am glad that we no longer have an administration that uses that kind of argument. Thank you very much, Ari Fleischer. We could not take the chance that Saddam Hussein might strike again. Well, the problem with that statement is that Saddam Hussein didn't attack the United States on 9/11. A lot of people were led to believe he did by statements coming directly from President Bush and Vice President Cheney. And that made the case for them, got them to back the war, a kind of remember Pearl Harbor kind of thing. In fact, in addition to all the talk about the nuclear threat from Saddam and all that mushroom cloud talk, this was the gut deal maker, the big, nasty, powerful untruth that led so many middle-of-the-road Americans to buy the Bush case for war, that Saddam Hussein had attacked us on 9/11, and we had to stop him from attacking us again. 3/4 of the American people bought that untruth. Ari told me this afternoon that this is not what he meant last night on Hardball. He didn't mean that Saddam Hussein attacked us on 9/11, but instead that Saddam had attacked other countries before and could attack us. That said, tonight, we're going to listen to the message that was coming out of the White House. What do others have to do? We begin tonight with David Korn of Mother Jones Magazine and former Assistant Defense Secretary Frank Gaffney, who's with the Center for Security Policy. Frank, let me talk to you about last night and what happened here when Ari Fleischer made that statement, which he later adjusted and said he didn't mean it exactly the way it came across, that Saddam Hussein had to be prevented from attacking again, and that's why we went to war with Iraq. Your thoughts?
Well, I think it's important that you read it back, Chris, because he didn't say attack us again. So I think Ari was right in his characterization of it as Saddam Hussein could not be allowed to attack again wherever, including, as he had repeatedly promised to do, in exacting revenge against the United States for the humiliation that we inflicted upon him in Desert Storm. And as you and I have talked about, sometimes with David, sometimes without him in the past, we know on the basis of the investigation that was conducted inside Iraq after the place was liberated, that he had plans to put chemical and biological agent in aerosol sprayers and perfume sprayers for shipment to the United States and Europe. That's the kind of terrorist threat that I think President Bush was right in preemptively stopping and removing Saddam Hussein.
The polling that took place before we attacked, conducted by Time and CNN, showed that 72% of the American people, nearly 3/4, believed it was likely that Saddam Hussein was involved in the attack on us on 9/11. How do you think they got that idea that somehow going to war with Iraq was getting even for 9/11?
Well, as I said, he kept saying that he was going to try to get even against us for Desert Storm, so it wouldn't be unreasonable for people to conclude maybe that that's what he was doing. There's also circumstantial evidence, not proven by any means, but nonetheless some pretty compelling circumstantial evidence of Saddam Hussein's Iraq being involved with the people who perpetrated both the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center and even the Oklahoma City bombing. So the American people, I think, are not stupid. I think that they were looking at a threat environment in which a guy like Saddam Hussein, who is repeatedly talking about exacting revenge against the United States, who was trying to shoot down our aircraft, who was actively supporting terrorism around the world, was a guy that you don't want to have an opportunity to act on his threats. That may be what they were concluding.
Well, before we hear from David Korn, let's show right now the compilation we have of clips by comments made on the record, on the air, by President Bush and by Vice President Dick Cheney about Iraq and its role in 9/11. Let's take a look at them, beginning with Vice President Cheney on Meet the Press, talking about a meeting he described between 9/11 hijacker Mohammed Atta and an Iraqi intelligence agent in Prague, a meeting which the 9/11 Commission said never took place.
It's been pretty well confirmed that he did go to Prague and he did meet with a senior official of the Iraqi intelligence service in Czechoslovakia.
He's a threat because he is dealing with al-Qaeda.
Evidence from intelligence sources
secret communications, and statements by people now in custody reveal that Saddam Hussein aids and protects terrorists, including members of al-Qaeda. It used to be that we could think that you could contain a person like Saddam Hussein, that oceans would protect us from his type of terror. But September the 11th should say to the American people that we're now a battlefield. The Battle of Iraq is one victory in a war on terror that began on September the 11th, 2001.
David Korn, how did the American people get the overwhelming belief that Saddam Hussein had attacked us on 9/11, that he was involved very directly and personally in the attack on us on 9/11, and therefore the war in Iraq was retribution?
Well, they listened to statements like those. Dick Cheney said, pretty well confirmed, the report that Mohammed Atta, the 9/11 ringleader, had met with Iraqi intelligence an officer in Prague. And at the time he made, you cited the 9/11 Commission to say that never happened, and that study came out years later. At the time that he made those statements, the CIA and the FBI had already debunked those reports, or at least cast tremendous amount of skepticism on it. Rather than being pretty well confirmed, they were dubious at best.
You mean even by December of 01?
Yes, and he kept saying it up to and even after the invasion. He repeated that at least a half a dozen times, if not more so, while his own intelligence community was saying this is not true. And what's also doubly specious about this is, even if Mohammed Atta had met with any one officer of the Iraqi intelligence service, what would it mean? Maybe absolutely nothing. Maybe the Iraqis wanted to keep dibs or keep tabs on al-Qaeda. That would have made sense for their own purposes. It didn't mean any plot, so he took an event that didn't happen and put an evil connotation around it and sold it on Meet the Press and elsewhere to the American public. Again, when Bush said, as we just saw, that Iraq is dealing with al-Qaeda in the present tense, intelligence analysts at the time were saying, really, there's not a strong case to be made for this. Bush also said at one point in time that Iraq had given training in poison and chemical weaponry to al-Qaeda. Okay. And that wasn't true
Well, the fact of the matter, all the polls show going over those years from the time of 9/11, Frank Gaffney, all the way up until the invasion of Iraq, or the liberation of Iraq, as you call it, the American polling showed over and over again that people believed that the actual people on the airplanes that attacked us in those suicide raids on 9/11 were Iraqis. How